Good morning, everybody. I'm Graham. I've been, I think I first got into reproducible builds and provenance and these questions about how to build things in 2015. Docker was like, just before 2015, I think. Docker was like brand new, and we were doing all this immutable infrastructure at work. And what I found was we really wanted to be able to rebuild these images, and we were building AMIs, and we wanted to build those again and again and have it keep working. We were a small team, but we had a lot of infrastructure to manage. And we had a pretty good system, but really what we learned through all that is that it was pretty slow. Somebody said, check out Nix. I said, I've read all this declarative stuff before, and it's all not true. We were using Chef at the time. And he said, well, try it anyway. I did, and it turned out to be pretty cool. That started a long-time love affair with Nix, which is still going. I'm now a CEO and founder of a company called Determinate Systems, which is a product company around sort of taking what is available in Nix, making it better, upstream, open source, and shaving off these rough edges that make it kind of hard and unpleasant to use. And one of the things that really surprised me is how important flakes have been. So let's get into that a little bit. Before we do, how many people here are familiar with Nix? Yeah, that's what I thought. And about used Nix? Sick. So earlier this year, we put together a documentation resource to help learn called Zero to Nix. And if you find a way to spell that doesn't get you to the right domain, let me know, and I'll send you a T-shirt or something, because we bought a lot of domains. What a terrible name. OK, so I sort of take a sort of spicy approach to this talk overall, because I think we really need to be focusing on how to move forward and get into this sort of new and I think much better world where we're using flakes. At any rate, so a lot of people are surprised to learn that Nix is actually 20 years old. It was started in about February, I think, of 2003. And it came with this Nix language, which was generally quite pure. But then there was a little bit on the outside that was impure called channels in the Nix path. And that was good for a long time. But as Nix grew, especially around 2016, there was an inflection point where it started getting much, much more popular on a monthly basis. But this era is really marked by really heavy centralization, where if you do something interesting or you package some software or you make a library, the goal basically fundamentally had to be get it merged into Nix packages, which is the central repository for Nix packages and also where NixOS is defined. And the reason that's important is because it was very difficult to share and to exchange and to depend on libraries and tools that were not in Nix packages. There was no mechanism for it. And so what that meant is also changes in development and especially sweeping changes to the ecosystem were largely, to some degree, consensus-driven. Or perhaps, not too many people complained, so I have the guts, I'm going to hit the merge button, and hopefully nobody reverts it later, which did happen from time to time. And this made it pretty expensive to experiment. You either did little experiments that were not too much of a waste of time if nobody liked it, or you didn't do them at all, or maybe you maintained a fork of Nix packages. Each of these things are kind of a result of this centralization and this sort of heavy, it created this sort of heavy pressure to make things official, because of the difficulty to exchange and share and collaborate like that. The other facet that made 2016 especially interesting is it was super easy to get started with NixOS. You wanted Nginx, you do nginx.enable equals true, and you had a pretty much good configuration of Nginx, same with Postgres and dozens of other services. But the problem is naturally, like, those were 80-20. They did a pretty good start if you didn't have strong opinions about it. And then as it was growing, this created this problem where people did have strong opinions about what their database did or what their web server did, because it was getting into more and more serious, much more specific and picky environments. And so since then, the module system has largely moved into this mode where it becomes more and more generic and less just turn it on and it'll be probably fine. And I think that's a little bit unfortunate. And it also, the centralized meant if you were a business and you did have those opinions, you often forked it and maintained an internal fork of your entire package ecosystem, which is just a bad story for security updates and whatnot. And so several years ago, about 4-ish, Ilko's nodding with me, Flakes were introduced. And Flakes are a mechanism for distributing expressions, so you can put them in an individual repository which just has the stuff that you care about. They're very easy to fork and maintain and update, and importantly, depend on. And what this means is that Flakes really makes it easy to sort of have an egalitarian approach of, if you just don't like it, go make your own. Like, nobody cares. It's so lightweight. You don't have to get widespread consensus. And the sharing is just built in. And so there's less technical pressure to make, to get your changes upstreamed. The only parts that really remain there are more of a social pressure that is left from the people who aren't using Flakes yet. And overall, Flakes have really taken off. The latest NixCon, which happened in October, nearly every talk had something to do with Flakes. However, stabilization and consensus is hard. And this is especially interesting for a project where widespread changes had to be done upstream for such a long time. And so today, the Nix project still considers Flakes to be experimental, and you have to opt in to turning them on. But this is really, I think, unfortunate, because what we see is that people want them. And so on this graph, red and blue are like the two sort of legacy ways. I know that's a little spicy. The two legacy ways to use Flakes or Nix in a project, and the yellow line is adoption of Flakes. And so these are new projects that are created every day. So these numbers aren't impressive, but 50 projects every day, maybe 60 or so, I don't know, 55. You taking advantage of Flakes, I think that's pretty good. The other thing that I learned when I started this company, and at the time I was still not interested in Flakes because they were experimental, is that new users were able to learn them when they were having a very hard time learning the old ways. And so I think it's really unfortunate that upstream has made it, has taken such a, I think, sort of plodding and overly cautious approach to this adoption when we're seeing the results firsthand in their user base. And so we've said this before, and we're going to say it again. My company, Determinate Systems, says Flakes are stable, and that is not just something we've made up. The fact is that Flakes haven't changed. They haven't been unreliable. They haven't been problems since they were introduced. And so we're going to have the guts here and just say they're stable, you should use them, and we're going to keep this promise that the current interface and the current way it works today is going to keep working. And this is really a result of the community adoption we're seeing. This is what a lot of people want. There are lots of people using them. There are some people who are not using Nix at all because they want to use Flakes and are afraid of it being unstable. But we're making this commitment to maintain the stability in the open implementation of Nix. To support this, earlier this year, we came out with the Determinate Nix installer. This is also completely open source, and our intention is for the upstream project to take advantage of it. The upstream installer is written in Bash, and nobody really knows what its failure rate is, but ours is written in Rust. It's stable. You can uninstall it. It's very difficult to uninstall upstream Nix. These sorts of improvements are what we've really focused our work here on, and specifically with the goal of getting it in upstream so that the project itself is better. It also uses a user-forward configuration, so it turns on Flakes by default, and it has about 0.5% error rate of installation. It also supports Linux, macOS, Windows subsystem for Linux. We have a GitHub action. The only place basically you can't use it is on NixOS because it deals with it itself. Oh, and Steam Deck. You can use this on a Steam Deck for fun reasons. We've seen our users really adopt this, and the Nix ecosystem at large really adopt this. We're seeing over, what's this say? Yeah, 225,000 installs every month. And if you look at the red line below, that's our error rate, which barely appears. Maybe a different scale there would have helped. I don't know. And we estimate that this is approximately about 30% of installations of the latest version of Nix are using our installer at this point. And again, this is all open source. We intentionally license this in a way where the Nix project itself you can use it, so we hope they do. Looking ahead, we see a lot of opportunity for the Nix ecosystem at large. And we're doing a lot of work here, like I said earlier, to improve the user experience of Nix and shave down these rough edges around the project. And like, we're a company, we're going to make money, but like, almost all of this is really based off of work that's in the open source projects, contributions we're making directly to Nix and in the Nix ecosystem. And we'd also really like to see other projects pushing this work forward too. Just a couple days ago, an alternative to FlakeHub, a sort of nascent first draft of it called Flakestry, just got launched, which is really exciting to see. But the work we're really trying to do here is solve a lot of the problems that I think there's sort of like the Nix ecosystem overall is really quite good, but there's a certain tinge of hobby feel to it. And I think with a little bit of polish, it takes it from hobby early adopters to serious use cases. And to be clear, there are already serious use cases. It's used in flight software, stock exchange. It's used in medical, in insurance and banking. It's already in all these places, but these users are having to do a lot of work to make it really appropriate and fit their use case and meet their compliance needs. So the first one, of course, is obviously discovery. If you don't have everything in Nix packages, then how do you find it? A lot of people have Flakes on GitHub, but you wouldn't even know it. And in fact, I didn't even know it. There's the number of people who have published something really cool to FlakeHub, and it's been around for ages. It's really, really remarkable. One of the really important things about this also is when you put something in Nix packages, the maintainer structure is a little bit unclear. Oftentimes somebody will, another maintainer of Nix packages will make changes to your project or your documentation, and there's no real clear ownership. It's just sort of owned by the community, which in many cases is really good, but if you have a project where you really care about what that experience looks like, it's difficult to do. And taking advantage of Flakes in this sort of distributed model, it really lets you take and implement a clear maintainership model of where the source comes from and what it looks like. We're also working a lot on the documentation story. We see consistently that people like Nix, but they have concerns and they have a lot of trouble with the documentation. For context, Nix packages has tens of thousands of packages, many architectures, hundreds of modules, and it's moving quickly, but it's also millions of lines of code. And having a coherent documentation strategy for a project of that size and of that varied, like it's just so cross-cutting that trying to make changes about like how the things are documented themselves is just very difficult. And so there's great spots and then there's very bad spots. But by taking this model where you're making small things, you can really focus on honing one small thing and making that experience super good. And that's something we've been working really hard on making possible. And so FlakeHub is automatically rendering documentation for projects and also exposes the internal structure of a Flake so you can more easily tell how to integrate it in your project. We're also introducing semantic versioning. So this is interesting. You would think that a package manager that was so interested in reliability and resiliency and all of these aspects that we care about would support semantic versioning. But while Flakes do have a lock file that pins to an exact source, typically people will follow main and just get the latest version of a package or a project. And then they'll just pin whatever version that was. Could have been in the middle of a refactor. Who knows? Who knows what was being done upstream? But it means that these users are really following bleeding edge, and that the maintainers have sort of this obligation and this pressure to not make major changes to their project that would break their users, even if it would be a really significant improvement. It would almost be easier to just make a new project with a similar name and iterate there. But by introducing the semantic version, you can get best of both worlds. You can be following a release channel. That means your stuff will keep working, and the upstream maintainers can go and take this approach of developing their project. We're also making some significant headway on the updates and security and provenance issues. So like I said earlier, if everything is coming from Nix packages, I don't know if I said this earlier, actually, but if everything comes from Nix packages, it can be really hard to tell. Are you using the Monero miner that is packaged in Nix packages, or are you not? You sort of have to read all your code and find out. But because the design of flakes are small, it's much clearer what you're actually using and what you actually depend upon. And this also makes it much more tractable to do things like CVE scanning about what's in a flake and what's not in the flake, and assign create a meaningful document that tells you what you're using. The other thing that we're working on here is, and this really, all of these things have been born out of things that we've needed internally, is this private support for private collaboration. So private flakes, private documentation, scanning, and all of these things for your private software as well. And everything we've talked about so far is essentially free and built on open source software. And this is where it sort of gets into more of a product. But you could also imagine more. So you could, especially on the collaborative properties, things like binary caching or distribution or deployment models. All of this has been built on these values that we have at Determinate. So we really believe in Nix. We are all through and through open source contributors for ages. We've been part of these projects for a long time. And our focus, again, is on making Nix tractable, making it easier to use and integrate into your work. And so we've done a lot of work here. So all of these things here are completely open. If we were to shut down the company tomorrow, all of these would keep working. They don't depend on us at all. It's not like we're subsidizing the cost to make it a good experience or collect users. And that's FlakeHub. I recommend you check it out. You could use the search function, see what we've got. Feel free to email me, gc@determinate.systems, and see you next. Oh, and Martin would be remiss. We have a Discord if you'd like to come chat with us. Any questions? Yeah, you, right here. In the front. Oh. Right behind you. Top.
Thank you. So how, if at all, do you think Nix Flakes changes the package curation scene compared to channels?
Good question. So Nix, okay, the question was about package curation and how does Flakes change that. I don't know. So the fact of the matter is Nix packages being a single mono repo has been incredibly valuable and incredibly useful because you can bisect a single repository and you've bisected your entire stack, right? At the same time, we're already the most popular by, I think, repository on GitHub. Getting things merged into it is getting more and more difficult. The maintenance burden of building a big thing is inherently high. And I think what that really means is that over time, Nix packages might be more picky about what gets into it, but that's just a hypothesis. I really don't know what this brings for the future. Good question.
So for composability, you've got flakes, and each one is kind of its own little package ecosystem, right? How do you? But they can depend on each other with Semver.
Sure.
How do you see composability working there? And are most of them just using Nix packages, and so the packages they use would probably be compatible, or how do you or is that sort of on the flake maintainer to figure out?
Okay, so many of them do use Nix packages, either for the literal package that they're delivering, which is a little bit weird, but generally for dependencies, like their Rust compiler, what have you. I'm sorry, just thinking through your question here. So by using Semver, like you can have 50 copies of Nix packages in your closure if you want to. The hope is that people will have a pretty broad match. So give me the latest unstable or give me the latest stable release. Hopefully those are basically the two options that we're going to see. And so the number will be small and the variability will be small. But it does remain to be seen what the true final outcome will be. And I think the part of the that's sort of a broader, like that's not specific to FlakeHub, to be clear. Like Flakes are coming, and it's not because we're here doing this work. It's because users have been dragging it out, right? And so we'll see. I'm excited to find out. Yes. Okay, so the Semver is implemented in FlakeHub. So there's a RFC to add semantic version support to Nix itself. The conclusion of that RFC was that somebody should go build it outside of Nix and see if it was relevant. So we did that, and hopefully it gets upstreamed into Nix directly.
I thought it was, you mentioned the term hobbyist as well, and I think it's always, of course, interesting when an ecosystem can take advantage of hobbyists, but then also kind of make it useful. And so I thought your description of that was very interesting. I was wondering, one of the things you mentioned as well, people used to follow main, but then Semver allows them more useful. I can also see that even, well, I don't know, I like following main personally, but sometimes I don't, if it's not something that's mine, I don't want to have to fix the breakages. So I can see that kind of change being useful for both, again, hobbyists and professionals as well. Do you see maybe conflicts, or do you see more, I think, synergy, between those kind of groups? And I'm not, this is just a very kind of abstract question, but I think it's interesting because I think Nix has such a very strong hobbyist user base, and that is interesting to me. Thank you.
Yeah. So in general, is Semver and following main, are they in conflict? Is that?
I thought Semver. I guess maybe I misunderstood. I thought you had described it as Semver as a more stable way again to depend on things than main. So I thought I could see that as being useful again for both kind of groups of hobbyists. I was describing myself because I don't necessarily want to fix every breakage. Yeah. As well as again you mentioned for users who need stability because they're building a business or something on it. Gotcha. So I didn't see it necessarily as in conflict. I just saw it as one improvement that helps both groups. And so I was interested in, I guess, if you have any other thoughts on that in the ecosystem, because it seems like your company does that.
Yeah. Okay. So. I think we'll see both for sure, right? When we first came out with the idea of Semver, it was kind of funny. A lot of Nix users were saying, well, why would I possibly want that? And then I said, well, haven't you ever updated a dependency and it just breaks? And they were like, yeah. I was like, wouldn't it be nice if that didn't happen? And they're like, yeah. I was like, isn't that something you do in other live package ecosystems too? Like, yeah. And so there are going to be lots of things where following the latest branch is just fine. Like your hardware support stuff, like we have a NixOS hardware, probably doesn't actually need releases for that because it's pretty much additive for new hardware that shows up. But things like Nix packages, it's actually kind of hard to implement something where you are following the current stable version of NixOS. You can, and what I mean by that is we do releases for like 2305 and 2311 is coming up, and switching between that is like, you have to remember to do that, and there's not good tooling to make that true. And that's sort of built in to the FlakeHub Semver model. Thank you.
Okay, one more question. It's me again. So now that you have Semver, how long is it before Nix has a solver?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there's an RFC, and it'd be great to see that implemented. I think there's still open questions about how much solving should Nix actually do. Like, should it try to do a global resolution of all like find a Nix packages that's suitable for everything? It doesn't have to do that because of the closure implementation of Nix packages. But maybe maybe there are cases it should, maybe there are cases it shouldn't. I think it's something that could happen this weekend, right? But I would expect I would be surprised if it landed in the next year.
That's all the time we have for questions for right now. Thank you so much for our speaker. I'll give a round of applause.